Hello guys, welcome back. In this video we will try to understand what our map, filter and reduce functions does in JavaScript. So before we actually jump into that, so we should know what is an array. Array is an instance of an array class, which is a built-in class. If you wanted to see like this one, it is a constructor function which is a built-in one, and we can also say it is a class. Okay, and whatever the arrays that we regularly create in the JavaScript, those are all the instances of this array class, right? Since it is a class or it's a constructor function which has a lot of functions inside, and which all those functionalities we can use on top of the array objects, because those are the instances of this array class. Now out of all those many methods which are present inside this array class, so there are three methods which are the most important one, and those we are going to discuss today. Out of them, map is the first one, and then filter, and then reduce. And these three methods actually having some common things between them, so we will see what exactly these three functions does and everything about them. Okay, so let's get into the video now. Let me create a very sample array. So I'll just create arr, and I'll be having three elements in it, 4 5 6, and let us try to see, like when I use array dot, so you see VS Code is suggesting us a lot of methods, and you see there are a lot of methods, and out of all this we will see what is map first. So when I type for map, you see there is a map method, and before, whenever we come across a particular method, right, in JavaScript for anything, we will firstly understand the signature of that function. So to understand the signature of that function, we can actually see the documentation of this map. So to see the documentation, we actually no need to go anywhere. We can just hover on it, or else we can just click on it, command and click on it, so that it will open the another file where we can actually see the definition of that particular function signature. Okay, but for now we can just hover on it, and you see it is a method, and it takes a callback function, you can see. So here is a callback function, and the callback function has three arguments. One is the value argument, second one is the index argument, which is a number, both are of number data type, and then the third one is array argument. Okay, and you see it also takes the second argument, which is an optional, and we are not bothered about it. Let us try to see what are those three arguments. So the first thing is map takes a callback. So let me write it as a callback here, and I will define the callback here. Now this callback actually takes three things, as we have just seen. One is the element, right, and the second one is the index, which are both are of number data type, and then the third one is the array itself. So I'll name it as arr. To avoid the confusion with a global variable, I'm just gonna name it as a simply. Okay, and then I will just print the values basically. So I'll just try to print the values, element, and then index, and then the a. So basically what happens in the map function is that it is a kind of iteration. So what map function does is it takes an array, right? So whatever the array we are using, that array, and this map function is going to do some task inside by using this callback. So whatever the task that we perform inside, so that task will be performed, and this map function will return another array basically of the same length as the array that we are giving. So for example, if I am applying the map function for this arr object, it is going to return another array which is of same length. So let me just capture the returned value into some variable called result, and I will just log the result as well. So console.log result, just like this. So basically what happens here is that I'm just calling map, and I pass this callback. Actually I don't need to create a separate method, I can just directly put that over here, but just for the sake of simplicity, I just created a callback method separately. And then this method actually takes three things: element, which is actually the element, so like 4 5 and 6, because I told you this callback will be called for 3 times because the array length is 3, and each time it calls, it captures the element, which is the element itself, like 4 5 6, and it also gonna capture the index, which is the index of the particular number. For example, when it captures 5, it will capture the index to be 1, and it always captures the array itself, the same array whatever is there, right? Let me just save it, and you see it got executed for 3 times. This is the first time, second time, and third time. just focus on this element printing statement as well as index. So if you see, element is 4 here, and then the index is 0. Of course 4 is at index 0, so that's why element is 4 and 0, and then 5 and 1, which is for the second element, 6 and 2, which is for the third element. And you see, whatever the result that we captured is, I told you it will be of the same length as the original array. So the original array length is 3, so you see we got an array of length 3 again, which is the result array. But wait a second, why are we getting this undefined? So basically whatever the callback returns, right, so all those returned values, since it is going to execute for 3 times, so 3 times this callback returns 3 different values. So those 3 different values will be constructed into another array, and that array will be actually the one eventually returned by this map function. But if you look at the map callback function, does it return anything? We are not returning anything from this callback, right? Because when there is no return statement in a callback, in a function basically, so you might know that JavaScript will internally return a value called undefined. So when we don't return anything, it internally returns an undefined value, something like this. Okay, so that's why we got captured with this undefined, 3 undefineds, right? Now let me just try to return 10 this time. For each time, irrespective of what value I'm taking, I mean what index or what element I am iterating on, so I will be iterating 10. So 3 times this function be called, and 3 times it is going to return the same static value, which is 10. So these 3 tens will be gathered into another array, and that array will actually be the one returned by this map function. So my result array is going to be an array with a length of 3, and this time I'm going to erase this just like this, and I will save it. Now you see we got 3 tens. So basically using array map function, we can actually iterate on the array. For example, I wanted to return element plus index. So when I return element plus index, for the first time when it iterates, it will be, the element will be 4 and the index be 0, right? So it is going to return 4 plus 0. Let me just write it. So it is going to return 4 plus 0 for the first time, and for the second time when it iterates on the number 5, it is going to return element which is 5, and the index of this 5 is 1, so it is going to return 5 plus 1. And third time when it iterates for the number 6, right, so it is going to return 6 plus the index of that element, which is 6, and the index is 2, so it is going to return 6 plus 2. So eventually the array actually returned by this map function would be a 4, and then 6, and then 8. So this would be the final array that will be written by the map function. And let me save, and you see 4, 6, 8, sorry, it is 4, 6 and 8. So this is what the map function, it is pretty straightforward. And then let us move on to the second function, which is the filter. So let me just reuse the same array for the filter function also. I'll just write it over here. So again, array.filter I'll use, and let us try to understand the definition of it. To understand the definition, one thing is we can use command and click so that we can see the definition, or else we can just hover on it and we can see the definition of it. So filter is a function, and which takes, again you see, it takes a value which is number, like it takes a callback actually, right? So let me just open this definition here. And if you see here, it takes a predicate which is a function actually, and the function arguments are value, index and array, much like the same thing what happened in case of map, right? And it also takes the second argument, which is this arg, and it is an optional one. Okay, let us not bother about that. So filter also going to take a callback, right? And this time I will be using the same callback again, and I'll pass the callback here. Why I'm using the same callback? Because it is also going to take the same stuff. So let me just print the values first and then show you. Element, index, and then a. So basically this filter method takes a callback function, and that callback function will be called for the length number of times of that array. And let us also capture the result returned by the function filter. So the filter function is also going to return an array, but this time filter may or may not return the result array with the length of the same length as array. It might return any length array, but it is going to return an array, that is for sure. So filter method returns an array, but we cannot predict the length of the result array. It may be of 0 length, it may be of 1 length, okay, but it returns an array. Now what is this callback? So this callback takes actually the element. So as I told you, filter calls this callback for 3 times here, because the number of elements in the array are 3. So each time it calls, the element will be captured, which is 4, and the index will be captured, which is 0 for the 4, and then a will be array always. Let me just save it, and you see we got the same thing, like how we got, like for the first time iteration it got 4, which is the element, and then the index of 4 is 0, and then the third thing is an array. And if you see, for the 3 iterations, the third argument is same, which is the array itself, and for the second call it is printing the number 5, which is the second element, and the index of the second element, which is 1, right? Now let us just try to print what is the result that is returned by the filter method. So when I print, it is going to be an empty array, because I'll tell you, let me just show you. So you see it returned an empty array. So basically the filter method returns an array, that is clear, right? So but we don't know what kind of array it returns. So whenever this callback returns a true value, it will just capture that element, right? So for example, if I return a true here always, let's say if I'm returning true value from this callback, so since for 3 times when this callback gets executed, 3 times the callback is returning the static true value. So whenever the callback returns a true value, what filter method do is it will just capture this element for which the function is returning true, and it will aggregate all these elements into separate array, and that separate array will be returned back to this result variable. So this time for 3 times we are returning true, so 3 times it will just capture the elements, and 3 elements will be the result. Let me save, and you see we got the same array back to as a result. You see I'm printing at line number 11, and this is what over here, right? Now let's say I wanted to filter out only even numbers. So when I wanted to filter out only even numbers, for even numbers only I should return true. That means if element is an even, how can we know whether it is even or not? If element %2 equal to 0, then only we will be returning true. Otherwise we would be not returning anything. That means that by default what will be returned? By default undefined will be returned. So undefined will be casted as a boolean of false. So definitely we are returning false in the other cases. So we don't need to write any false return statement. So basically now this time the callback will be executed for 3 times. When it executes for the number 4, right? 4 %2 is actually 0. So we are returning a true. That means 4 will be aggregated into the array. And similarly when we are in the second element, so the element is 5, and 5 %2 is not equal to 0. So this time undefined will be returned, because we are not returning anything for the odd case. So when undefined is returned, it will be calculated as a boolean of false, as we know, right? So this time 5 will not be aggregated into the array, because the callback has returned a false value. And similarly for the third iteration, when this callback executes for the number 6 %2 is actually 0. So the function callback returns a true value. Since the callback returns a true value, it will capture that element into the aggregated array. So 6 will be coming to this aggregated array, and eventually this filter function will return this array of length 2, and that will be captured by the result variable. So when we are printing result, so this time we would definitely get the array of result to be a 4,6. Let me save, and you see we got the 4,6 array. And why the name filter comes is that it filters out the element. Like here in this case, there are 3 elements. Some of them are odd, some of them are even. So we are filtering out even numbers. So there is one use case of this, like let me just, we can have an array of objects. I'll just comment this out. I'll have some people object, and this people is a array, and which contains multiple objects like name, something like Rajesh, and then it contains the age of that particular person, let's say 42, 43, and then let's say another person is having a name of, let's say, Arvind, and his age is, let's say, 22, and then let's say another third person whose name is, let's say, Akhil, and then his age is, let's say, 25. Now let's say from this array I wanted to filter out the people who are having the age of less than 55, less than 25. So that means how many people are there who are having the age less than 25? Only one person, who is Arvind, and Akhil Singh have the age to be 25. Now to do this task, right, we can actually use the filter method. So I'll filter out the result. So let result is equal to this people array. People is an array. So people dot filter I can use, and this filter takes a callback. So I'm writing the callback directly over here, and this callback actually gonna take three arguments. We know one is the element, index, and the array itself, but we don't want the index and the array. We just want the element, or we can name it as a person, right? Now this person, when I'll be returning it true from this callback, then that person will be captured into the aggregated array, and that aggregated array finally will be returned by this filter function. So I'll set up a condition saying that if person, I don't need to actually set up as a condition, directly I'll return if person dot age is less than 25. That means whenever the person's age is less than 25, right, that will be returning a true, otherwise it will be returning a false, right? So whenever this callback returns a true, then only that particular element will be captured into the aggregated array. So in this case, when I print the result, right, I would be getting only Arvind as a name, Arvind object only into my final output. Let me just save. There is an error, unquote error, cannot access result. I think, yeah, here is the issue. Let me save. Now you see we got a single object, and in that object we got the person name to be Arvind and then age to be 22. Now let us move on to the reduce method, which is the last one, and most of the people do not understand it, but this time you will definitely understand it. So let us create the array. I'll create the array which is 6, 19 and then 23, right? And let us use the reduce method. Firstly, let us try to understand the signature of it. So you see, whenever I hover on it, you see it actually takes a callback function, right, which is a first argument. So that's a callback function. And if you look at this callback function actually takes a previous value, which is a number, and it takes a current value, which is a number, and it takes the current index. Like the callback takes all this. So the current index, which is the index of the particular element, because all these reduce, filter, map methods will be iterating eventually on the array, right? So current index means on which element currently it is iterating on, right? And it also takes a number array. So there is another definition for it. With the definition, we can able to see this reduce method. Let me just open the library. So here you see at line number 59 and at line number 60, we have two definitions for this reduce method. So this line number 59 is acceptable, but let us look at the line number 60, which makes much clarity about what reduce is. So you see it takes a callback, which is the center callback, right? And in this callback function, it takes a previous value, current index, and then the array. So the callback is now gonna take 4 arguments, unlike in case of map and filter, which were taking only 3 arguments. So what is the additional argument that it takes? The previous value. We will discuss what is this previous value very shortly. And if you look at the second argument of this reduce method, which is an initial value, right? So by default, this initial value will be set to 0. Okay, just remember that by default, this initial value will be set to 0 when we don't pass it. When we pass it, we can pass any number basically. Okay, now let us come back to here. So what it takes 2 arguments. One is a callback, so I'm writing it as an empty callback, and the second thing is initial value. So initial value, I gave it to be something like 10. We will see what is this initial value does. So basically what this function does is, this function, whatever it returns, those value will be aggregated. So the meaning of reduce is that it is gonna iterate on this array, and by iterating on this array, it is going to make it all the array elements, it is going to make into a single thing. So the function reduce will return a single thing. So let me just capture that into the variable result, right? And before that, let us try to build this callback function. And in the callback function, it takes previous value. So I'll just make it as prev, and then it takes current value. Okay, current value, right? And it also takes current index, and then it also takes the array at the last. So before we do anything, right, I will just log all these 3 values so that I wanted to show you. So prev, and then I'm logging current value, right? And then I'm logging current index and then a. So basically what happens is this reduces the function which will be iterating on this array, right? Let me just have only two numbers for the sake of simplicity. So firstly what happens is this callback will be executed for the first time. When it executes for the first time, right? Remember, when it executes for the first time, this function will be called, right? When this function is called for the first time, the previous argument will capture the second argument of the reduce method, which is the initial value, right? So the previous value for the first time will capture the second argument of the reduce, which is the initial value. Okay, and current value will be 6, which is straightforward. Current index would be 0 because we are iterating the first element, and a will be the array itself. Okay, and when it iterates for the second time, so for example, this function is gonna return something. Let me just instead of printing, let me just return some value called something like 4. So what happens is, when it is being called for the first time, previous variable will capture the reduce method's second argument. When we don't pass the reduce method second argument, previous will capture 0. So for the first time, previous will be what? 10, and then the current value will be what? 6. Let me just write that. Previous will be, for the first iteration, will be 10, and then the current value will be 6, and the current index would be 0, which is the first element index, and then the array is 6 and 19. So this is the first time call, when this callback is called for the first time. And you see what this function returns? This function returns a static number, which is 4. Okay, and this returned value will become the previous value for the next call of this callback. So when it is called for the next time for the number 19, right? This time the previous variable will capture the previously returned value. So what previously returned? 4. So it will capture 4, and then the current value is 19 for the second iteration, and the current index would be 1 because we are on the second iteration, and then the a would be 6 and 19, right? And this time what is our function is returning? Our function is returning 4. So for the final iteration, when the final iteration is done, that means when finally this callback is called, finally whatever this function returns, right, that will be the actual value returned by this reduce method. So our result variable is going to capture that value. So when I log result, right, when I log result, so result will capture, so whatever the last iterated call is there, right, when this callback is iterated for the last element, whatever the value this function returns, that will be the value returned by this reduce method. So it will just result this time will just capture this 4, because for the last iteration also we are returning a static value 4. Now these two will be the first two lines of output, and this one is going to be the last line of output, which is 4. So let me write it over here. The result will be a 4. Let me save, and you see we got 10, 6, 0. So why we are getting 10? Because for the first time of iteration, that means when the callback is called for the first time, whatever the second argument is there in the reduce method, that will be the initial value, which will act as a previous value for the first call. So that's why previous is 0 for the first time call, and then the current value is 6, of course, and then the index of 6 is 0, and then array is 6 and 19. Now you see for the first function call, it returns a value 4, and this returned value will be a previous value for the second call. That means when the callback is called for the number 19, right? So this time the previous will capture the previously returned value, which is 4. So that's why it prints a 4 over here, and then 19 is actually the element, and the index is 1, and then it actually prints the array itself, a. Okay, now when we are iterating for the number 19, my callback function is returning again another static value, which is 4, right? It is returning another static value, which is 4. So this time whatever the final returned value is there by this callback for the final iteration, that value will be returned by the reduce function actually. So reduce function will return what? 4, because we are returning 4 for all the calls. So result will be what? Result will be a 4 as expected. Now why the name reduce comes is, let's say Using the same technique, if I wanted to find the summation of all the elements, so I'll give the initial sum to be kind of 0, right? So that the first call, for the first call, my previous will become 0. And instead of returning 4 always, I'll just return something like previous plus the current element, current value. Okay, so basically what happens is, for the first time previous will be 0, so 0 plus the current value, which is 6. So 0 plus 6 will be returned for the first call, and that 0 plus 6 value, which is 6, will be the previous value for the second call. And then for the second call, whatever the data that we are returning, which is 6 plus 19, which comes out to be 25, and that is the final call. So the reduce method will return 25. So this time the result variable is going to be a 25, which is a summation of all the elements. Let me just save it, and we get a 25 here. I hope you understand all this. For more videos like this, please do subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.